Chapter 126, Rotting Flesh. The first thing Hawan had grown used to after coming to this world was the smell of corpses. When someone died inside the carriage, the body was thrown away. But the stench soaked into the carriage as the corpse rotted, and it did not disappear. It remained in the floor, in the bars, and on people's bodies. It was different from the smell of living flesh festering with pus. That sour odor seemed to invade his brain through his nose. Once you smelled it, you could never forget it. Hawan rose to his feet. There were several more footprints nearby. He checked a few other spots and examined the marks left on the tree branches. The black crumbs were present in the other footprints as well. They definitely belonged to the magic beast. What does it look like to you, Hawan? Gwil came closer and asked in a low voice. It's rotting flesh. If the magic beast isn't carrying a corpse around in its mouth, then the magic beast itself must be dead. Wrinkles formed on Gwil's forehead. Judging from the tracks, that does seem to be the case, but I've never experienced anything like this before. A dead corpse moving around, is that even possible? Gwil trailed off. It was not as if Hawan had read novels or comics about it. But he knew the concept of a necromancer. This was a world with water, fire, and even healing magic, so he had naturally assumed such occupations would exist here as well. But perhaps they were extremely rare in this world, or perhaps they did not exist at all. Gwil glanced at the adventurers standing a short distance away and spoke quietly. There are truly strange things among magic beasts. I've experienced all sorts of things in my time. But even at my age, I've never once seen a corpse move. If they find out, they'll be shaken. It sounded like he was asking whether they should simply proceed without telling them. Hawan stared silently at the black crumbs scattered on the ground, then said. Even so, we have to tell them. We can't hide this. Some people may decide to give up and go back. The fact that it's a magic beast is frightening enough, but if they hear that a corpse is moving on top of that... Hawan let out a small sigh. Originally, he had not been worried about this job at all. He had thought that with Yunhui's ability, she could kill anything. But if the opponent is already dead, poison might not work. He did not know exactly what principle allowed Yunhui to kill living creatures. But it probably attacked living cells. If the creature was already dead, then Yunhui's attack might have no meaning at all. Ounce's attack might work. That child could bend or break physical things, so he could surely disable a corpse's limbs as well. No animal could move if it had no legs to walk on. But Ounce's ability was still at the level of a baby taking its first steps. Even if it was growing day by day, it was nowhere near enough to face a rampaging magic beast. Hawan raised his head and looked at Gwil. If the magic beast appears, I'll deal with it. I'm planning to ask those people to act as beaters. The basic strategy would not change. They would track the magic beast, then make loud noises and threaten it with spears and blades to drive it toward one place. Once it came within the range of Hawan's mana, they would use the nets to capture it alive. Then they would use the cub to lure in the mother and capture her as well. Originally, he had been keeping Yunhui's ability in mind to some extent, but now he had to assume that option was gone. Gwil grinned. I'm glad you're that kind of person. It's important to know what kind of person you're entrusting your back to. Sorry for testing you. Maybe he had been sounding him out a little, checking whether Hawan would deceive the other adventurers or not. Gwil narrowed his eyes and looked toward the distant sky. If you go in that direction, there's an abandoned village. The population gradually dwindled because of the war, until eventually no one was left. The beast is probably in the forest near that village. Hawan, wait there. Gwil hunched his shoulders slightly and crouched down. I'll drive the magic beast that way with the others. As he carefully studied the shape of the footprints, Gwil asked. How are you planning to use the nets? It might be different for an ordinary beast, but nets don't work on magic beasts. I'm going to use the wind. Gwil nodded. He seemed to understand what Hawan meant right away. Even so, you'll need human strength. You won't be able to throw that many nets by yourself. Gwil stood and walked toward the others. He looked back at Hawan and smiled. You just focus on finishing it. Leave getting things to that point to me and those people. Several of them are close friends of mine. They'll support you well enough. Gwil spoke lightly, but it was not an easy task. To throw the nets, they would have to get close to the magic beast. They had to be prepared to be injured or killed. Thank you. When Hawan bowed his head, Gwil laughed. We're the ones who should be grateful. Without you, we probably wouldn't even have been able to attempt this. At least, I wouldn't have dared touch it so easily. After saying that, Gwil headed toward the others. He called everyone together in a loud voice and began explaining the situation, saying it was a magic beast unlike anything they had seen before. Unease spread among the adventurers. They began murmuring, each of them saying something. The adventurers' voices gradually grew louder. A few voices were especially loud. One man protested harshly, saying this was different from what they had first expected. 3 other adventurers seemed to get swept up by him and joined in angrily. The guild had explained from the beginning that they did not know what kind of magic beast it was. Because they did not know what would happen or how things would proceed, the reward had been set much higher than usual. Jack brought that up and clashed roughly with the protesting adventurers. The sounds of people arguing, the guild attendant's explanation, and voices trying to stir up the other adventurers by claiming this was not what had been promised all mixed together. Leaving the adventurers' voices behind, Hawan headed toward the carriage. Lizzie was looking back and forth between the adventurers and Hawan, clearly uneasy. When he approached the carriage, Lizzie shrank back slightly and lowered her head toward him. What's happening? Why are they fighting like that? The magic beast we're tracking is very different from what we expected, Lizzie. It looks like it's already dead. Dead? Lizzie's eyes went round. It seemed she had not expected that at all. Hawan explained that he still did not know exactly what kind of magic beast it was, but for some reason, it seemed as though a dead corpse was moving around with a will of its own. I think the pattern on the magic beast's body may have some meaning. Even if it isn't a Zent angle, it's probably connected to the corpse moving. And perhaps it might be related to Santa as well. It was different from what he had originally thought, but if there was even the smallest clue, he wanted to cling to it. At the same time, however, he was a little worried. The fact that he could not rely on Yunhui's ability made him uneasy. Unlike what he had told Gwil, his heart was slightly wavering, wondering what he would do if something unexpected happened. As if she had guessed how he felt, Lizzie composed her expression. She nodded tensely, then put a smile on her firm face. I understand, Hawan. It's all right. You don't have to worry. Don't worry about me or Dorothy at all. If it gets dangerous, we'll definitely run away with Yunhui. Lizzie held out her small hand. When Hawan took it, Lizzie wrapped both hands around his large hand and smiled brightly. Yunhui is strong. If anything happens, she can just kick it away and smash any magic beast or whatever else to pieces. If we're beside Yunhui, there's no way we'll be in danger. So don't worry. If it's Yunhui, she really might be able to do that. At Hawan's words, Lizzie laughed softly. If she and Dorothy were safe, then that was enough. There was still the concern that capturing the cub alive in order to lure the mother might be difficult. But Hawan did not think he himself would be injured or killed. He had at least that much confidence. The only ones he was worried about were Lizzie and Dorothy. If Lizzie understood that and knew she had to avoid so much as injuring a finger for his sake, then there was nothing left weighing on his mind. Hawan glanced toward the carriage. Is Dorothy still staying away because she's afraid she'll start resembling me? Yes. Until just a little while ago, she was talking to Ounce about that. She'll be fine by tonight. Yeah. Before he knew it, the voices arguing had quietly settled down. When Hawan looked toward the adventurers, he saw the man who had protested so fiercely earlier leaving with a few others. It seemed all the other adventurers were staying. After that, time passed busily. They drew up a rough strategy and explained it to the adventurers. The adventurers led by Gwil would start near the place where the magic beast was located, beating their weapons and shouting to drive it out. Driving a magic beast to a desired location across a vast forest and open plains was not easy. In a sense, the beater's task might be even harder than Hawan's job of capturing the beast at the end. When Hawan expressed concern, the guild attendant smiled as if to reassure him. Don't worry. Gwil is one of the most capable active magic beast hunters. If he can't do it, then there probably isn't anyone who can. Gwil and the adventurers followed the footprints and traces into the forest. The young magic beast might be an even younger individual than they had thought. It seemed to have no proper survival instincts at all. Unlike its mother, it had left traces everywhere it stepped. That made predicting its movements even harder. Since it was already dead, it had no need for food. Because of that, it had no particular objective either. It seemed to be simply wandering anywhere and everywhere in search of its mother. Once Gwil and the adventurers entered the forest and completely disappeared from sight, Hawan headed toward the nearby village with the guild attendant. The village looked like part of a scene from a Western film. It was as if dozens of isolated houses were gathered together in the wilderness. On the empty land, only a few houses and barn-like structures remained. Here and there, pieces of wood that seemed to have once been part of a fence still left traces around the village. But most of them appeared to have been taken by someone for firewood. The insides of the houses were similar. The doors, the furniture, and even parts of the floors had almost all been stripped away. Only the walls, pillars, and things that were difficult to move or tear out remained. This is going to be a lot of work. I need to hurry. Even if it was an inexperienced cub, it would naturally be wary if nets were sitting plainly on the barren ground. They needed at least some cover. Hawan began tearing off or knocking down parts of the buildings that seemed usable as cover. He moved them around the village and made them look like natural obstacles. Around those pieces of cover, he placed the nets. That work continued for several days. During that time, the guild attendant received several messages from other places. It seemed they were finding traces of the mother here and there. On the fifth day, a message finally arrived from Gwil. They had found the young magic beast. The message said they would slowly begin driving it toward him, so he should be ready. From that point on, he was so busy he barely had time to breathe. He hurried to finish the remaining work and spread out his mana detection every day to check the surroundings. Then, a few days later, something that appeared to be the young magic beast entered the range of his mana detection. It seemed smaller than Orthos. He could not tell its exact appearance, but it was a four-legged beast with one head. The young magic beast did not fear humans. That was what the reports so far indicated. Perhaps it was because every human it had encountered had been weak. Because of that, neither Hawan nor Lizzie needed to hide. The beast knew from experience that humans were no threat to it. Rather, if it saw humans, it might remember its anger at being unable to find its mother and the people who had tormented it, then charge even more fiercely. Around the time Hawan finished his basic preparations, loud shouting and the clash of metal finally rang out from far away. The young magic beast began to appear in the distance. Behind it, people were spread out widely, slowly chasing it forward. When the magic beast tried to run in another direction, the people on that side shouted and struck their weapons together to make noise. The magic beast panicked and changed direction again. The way it floundered around somehow resembled a young puppy. As the magic beast came closer, its appearance became a little clearer. Ah! Lizzie's voice came from a short distance away, where she sat in the coachman's seat. Hawan clicked his tongue without realizing it. Chapter 127 When whales fight, the shrimp's back breaks. The demon beast looked like a hyena that had been enlarged several times over. Black patterns spread across its entire body like a spider web. When it was alive, it had probably looked imposing. But now, its flesh had rotted and crumbled away, exposing bone here and there. It looked gruesome. Its face was especially bad. Its eyeballs were still there, but the flesh around them had gone soft and crumbly, falling away little by little whenever the creature moved. Just looking at it was painful. Had Gwell told them to prepare this? Among the adventurers, there were several people holding broad iron plates. Whenever the demon beast failed to go where they wanted, they struck the plates with the scabbards or flat sides of their swords. Clang! Whenever that sound rang out, the young beast flinched with its half-stripped, rotting body and staggered forward or sideways in confusion. If sound alone did not make the beast change direction, they reflected sunlight off the iron plates and shone it into the beast's eyes. When the light touched its weakened eyeballs, the demon beast closed its eyes. Or at least, it seemed to try. But more than half of its eyelids had rotted away and disappeared. It forced what remained of them half shut and turned away. Unable to bear the sight, Lizzie turned her head. The carriage Lizzie was riding in was slightly hidden beside the house. From the demon beast's position, Lizzie might be visible, but Yunhui was not. They had hidden her in case the beast saw the unicorn, panicked, and ran away. Yunhui, too, was blocked by the house and could not see the demon beast. She could probably sense it, but she would not know what it looked like. If Yunhui saw the pitiful young beast stumbling around in fear, would she feel sorrow as another demon beast? Or, since she was both a demon beast and now in existence called Rudolph, would she feel nothing at all? In Yunhui's or Ounce's eyes, what did humans look like? What did Hawan look like? His heart stirred uneasily. Just because something was an animal did not mean it was not cruel. Just as there were cats that toyed with mice, there were demon beasts that deliberately played with humans and caused them pain. But still, humans were the cruelest. Even so, Hawan pressed his lips together. Others might not know, but Hawan, of all people, had no right to condemn Gwell. Gwell must have thought of this method because it was the most effective way to drive the demon beast toward Hawan. It was not because he was cruel or wanted to torment the beast. And Hawan himself was about to do something even crueler. He could not look at someone else and accuse them of being heartless. With a low sigh, Hawan picked up the net he had placed nearby. The demon beast was getting closer and closer. It did not seem to be thinking of avoiding Hawan. Since he stood alone without a gong or weapon, he probably did not look dangerous. Maybe it's just too confused to think at all. As the young demon beast ran from the humans and the noise, it cried pitifully, as if calling for someone. Awoo, awoo. That was how it sounded. Like a kitten searching for its mother. Hawan poured mana into the net. The mana flowed along the net. As strength filled the loosely woven strands and pulled them taut, the net slowly rose upward, as if swelling like a balloon. Hawan glanced toward Lizzie. Lizzie gave a small nod, as if telling him not to worry. She was still averting her eyes from the demon beast. Hawan steadied his breathing and lowered his stance. After lifting the net slightly with wind, he slowly ran toward the beast. The young demon beast seemed a little startled. It flinched and stopped, then bared its teeth and growled. Through the flesh that crumbled away, part of its jawbone showed. It seemed to be trying to threaten him, but instead, it only looked pitiful. The demon beast glanced back once at the people approaching from behind with loud noises. Then it began running toward Hawan. Each time the huge body of the demon beast struck the ground, the earth was gouged slightly. The beast came charging at Hawan in great strides, shedding pieces of itself as it moved. It probably intended to bite him to death in one mouthful. Its teeth were aimed at Hawan's neck. Hawan twisted his body slightly and threw the net into the air. The net, hardened by mana, spread over the demon beast's body. Startled, the beast thrashed, and one side of its head slipped free from the net. If it had been a normal demon beast, that would not have happened. But this beast's body was in a state as if it had been made from crispy powder and sticky flour dough. One part was rotting and oozing, while another was crumbling apart. The side of its head that the net touched seemed to have been half rotten and half crumbling. The edge of the net dug into its skin, leaving a hollow groove. Because of that, the net slipped, part of its head got free, and when the demon beast thrashed, the net scraped across its entire body and fell to the ground. The demon beast tried to slip past Hawan and run. Hawan quickly spread his mana and seized the beast's body. In the meantime, several adventurers who had rushed over picked up more nets and threw them at the beast. Those holding iron plates ran in front of the beast's escape route and struck the plates with their sword blades, making a terrible racket. While the adventurers blocked the beast's path from every direction, shouting like primitive tribesmen, Hawan poured mana into the nets they had thrown. The demon beast bared its teeth in every direction and growled threateningly, but it only looked miserable. Caught in the nets thrown from all sides, the demon beast became more tangled the more it struggled. And when Hawan strongly infused the nets with mana, its body was soon pressed down, leaving it unable to move at all. Trapped in the nets, the demon beast let out a long, mournful cry. It was not a very loud sound. But the cry of the demon beast spread far enough to reach the sky. It was the kind of cry that made even a human heart ache. The adventurers surrounding the demon beast quietly looked down at the creature inside the net. No one spoke. It was supposed to be a joyous thing. They had captured a demon beast that harmed people. And yet, not one person's heart felt light. Ah, it disappeared. Hans realized that one of the demon beasts caught on his thread of mana had vanished from his detection range. He sent mana once more toward the distant air, but he could not find any trace of that beast. The movement of mana coming from the demon beast had been completely erased. He could no longer track it. The feeling was less that it had died and more that it had been covered by another mana. He did not know what had happened or whether such a thing was even possible. But where the trace had vanished, there had been an intense fluctuation of mana. That was probably the cause. The distance was too great for him to know for certain, but the being that had covered the demon beast's mana was probably human. It was not a demon beast. Hans had never seen a demon beast with such intense mana before. Maybe it's similar to the heroes. The amount of mana over there was far greater than the heroes. It was not that the quality of the mana was the same either. Of course, because it was so far away, this was only a guess. But it was probably correct. Still, there was something similar about it. He could not point out exactly what it was, but if he had to compare it to something, it was like a first impression. An uncertain feeling that, when seeing someone, made you think they resembled someone else for some reason. The mana in the distance had that sort of similarity. Suddenly, he felt a chill. A shiver ran down his spine, like he was about to be caught by the very person he had been secretly spying on. Hans hurriedly withdrew his mana. The remnants of mana that had stretched thinly and connected to the demon beast could be scattered easily just by loosening his focus a little. The other party probably had not noticed. Only when the thread of mana was completely severed, making him feel certain that no one could detect him, did the tension finally leave his waist. When he came back to his senses, his entire body was drenched in sweat. He did not think he had ever been this tense in his life. That was how intense the mana on the other side of the empty distance had been. Mana was similar to a collection of invisible, tiny particles. Spreading mana was much like releasing those particles into the air. Particles of mana sensed and influenced one another. Most magic was manifested by using that property. How far one could send those particles of mana, and whether one could maintain the connection between them, determined the range over which magic could be cast. Compared to other mages, Hans had a remarkably small amount of mana. He barely hovered at the minimum line needed to use magic at all. But his skill in connecting mana particles was incomparable to anyone else's. He could not spread it widely or powerfully, but Hans could stretch an endlessly long, thin thread of mana. Of course, he could not send it into empty air with nothing there. There had to be some kind of medium. That medium could be anything. A demon beast, a human, even a lifeless object. Once he connected his mana to a medium, he could send a small amount of power through it and search the medium's location and the things around it. For other people, magic ended once they used it. But the threads of mana Hans attached to objects could continue to be maintained to a certain degree. It was similar to tying a thin thread around something. It was weak enough that he could cut it anytime, but as long as it did not break, it could remain connected indefinitely. As Hans chewed over the fear he had felt just before the mana was severed, he suddenly murmured, "Is there a monster like the hero over there too?" Hans lightly jumped down from the sloped ground. The king seemed extremely pleased that the hero had descended. He probably thought they could finally gain the upper hand in the war against Simone. That was understandable. After all, the one thing that always increased on a battlefield was corpses. But there's no way something like that is a hero sent by God. Perhaps it was the work of an evil god. The evil god was an existence that hated humans. No one wanted to say it aloud, and people now tried hard to ignore it as if it no longer existed, but there were many who believed in the evil god. Hans was one of them. An existence that raised corpses and controlled them. Hans shuddered. When he imagined becoming like that after he died, a terror beyond fear surged up within him. At the root of it lay a deep disgust toward the hero and fear toward God. Something that ominous. No matter how advantageous it makes us in the war, we must not allow such an existence. We'll end up provoking God's wrath. Hans stopped when he saw Kong Taehyung speaking with the unit commander. Behind Kong Taehyung stood several military tents. A unit created to train the hero was stationed there. There were roughly 50 people. That unit included mages who would train him to operate mana and use magic, teachers who would instruct him in this world's language and etiquette, escorts, observers, and others. Hans had joined this unit as the magic teacher responsible for teaching Kong Taehyung mana control. But at the same time, he had also received secret orders from the king. His mission was to learn and confirm any information he could about Simone, the number of Simone soldiers stationed at the border, any notable movements, the number of mages, and the types of magic they used. The unit commander had probably received similar orders. After leaving the capital and approaching the edge of the kingdom, the commander had continued moving along the border. It had also been the unit commander's idea to send the demon beast corpses created by the hero beyond the border. Setting aside Hans's disgust and unease, things had gone well so far. Following the paths of the moving demon beasts, they had gathered quite a lot of information. But he was uneasy. The existence behind the mana he had just encountered filled him with endless unease. Hans hurried toward the unit commander. "Commander." When Hans came closer, the commander, who knew what Hans was doing at this hour, gave him a look. "Well then, hero. We will proceed with the matter as discussed." "Sounds good." The hero answered with awkward pronunciation and grinned. His face had gone slack. It was a sly, oily sort of expression. Kong Taehyung glanced at Hans and lowered his head slightly. Then he quickly went off toward his own tent. Inside his tent stayed the beautiful woman who had been attached to him in order to win over the hero. Once the hero had gone some distance away, the unit commander glanced at Hans. "Come." Hans closed his mouth and quietly followed behind the commander. After they entered the commander's tent and the thick entrance flap was lowered, the commander asked, "What is it? Your face has gone completely white." Had his face looked so shocked that even the commander could tell? Feeling a little embarrassed, Hans opened his mouth. The connection to one of the demon beasts was severed. "There is someone with powerful mana on the other side." "I see. So there are only 2 left now." The commander frowned. He had not properly understood what Hans meant. He only seemed to think it was a pity that the connection to a demon beast had been lost. Hans hurriedly spoke again. "That is not the issue. It seems there is a mage on the other side with stronger mana than the hero." "What kind of nonsense is that?" The commander looked at Hans as if dumbfounded. There cannot be anyone with stronger mana than the hero. But you must have misunderstood. Everyone knows Simone does not have a hero. The commander sighed and looked at Hans. I believe it is probably your mistake, but I will send up a report for now. However, confirm it again. If word spreads that Simone has such a mage right now, the morale of our army, which has finally risen, will be ruined. Think carefully before you speak. Understood. Hans had no choice but to leave the commander's tent. After he left, he could hear the commander grumbling. This is why mages are. They get frightened by the smallest things and never think about what effect their words might have. No sense at all that they've become soldiers. Hans lowered his head slightly and walked between the tents. It was well known that soldiers disliked mages. Hans had come to understand that very well while working with the military. Even when his opinion was valid, there were more cases where it was not properly accepted. This time will be the same. The commander had said he would send a report upward, but he had not said when. Hans's words probably would not be included in this report. Perhaps 1 or 2 years later, when enough time had passed to prove Hans completely wrong, it would finally be written into a report. As evidence to mock him with. He remembered something a sailor he had once met had told him. They said that in the sea, there were fish larger than humans. They were called whales. While talking about those whales, the sailor had told him an interesting proverb. When whales fight, the shrimp's back breaks. It means that when the strong fight, the weak suffer. Hans's heart burned black. Perhaps no, certainly he was going to die in this war. There was no way an ordinary human could survive a war where monsters clashed with monsters. It was exactly like a shrimp's back breaking in a fight between whales. Though compared to the hero and the enemy nation's mage, he did not think he was even worthy of being called a shrimp. Why was life so unfair? He was 40 years old. Because of his unusual ability, he had been dragged into the army and worked to the bone, never even getting married. Ah, damn it! If he had known things would turn out like this, he should have at least held a woman's hand once. Chapter 128, Run, Yunhui. For a moment, Hawan thought he sensed something. It felt as though someone was secretly watching him. Hawan stared into empty air. Of course, there was nothing there. It was not as though the empty space had eyes and was staring back at him. Still, the feeling bothered him, so Hawan spread his mana around himself. His mist-like mana slowly expanded, feeling through the air. He wondered if he might detect something, but he found nothing. Was I imagining it? Just in case, he widened the range of his mana detection as far as he could, but all that continued beyond him was empty space. Of course it was. He felt foolish for even thinking otherwise. Hawan drew back the mana he had spread out. Like moisture seeping into the air, the mana gradually sank beneath his skin. That was when he felt something strange. Hey! When he released his mana and then drew it back in. There were rare times when it felt as if something had mixed into it. Of course, nothing was actually entering his body. If he had to describe it, it was more like a faint scent clinging to him. Just like now. It feels like something unfamiliar came back with it. But he could not be certain. It was so faint that he could barely even say he had felt anything. Just a tiny sense of wrongness. He tried to check again, but the sensation had already vanished. As if it had never been there to begin with. Maybe it had belonged to the magic beast. The excited cub's mana had been stretching everywhere, leaving traces in every direction. Hawan spread his mana again and checked the surroundings, but he found nothing. Is something wrong? Did you find something? The nearby adventurers asked with puzzled expressions. Hawan told them it was nothing and turned his attention back to the magic beast. The captured cub was immediately loaded into the cart. The adventurers pinned the beast down with a mana-infused net while others beat iron plates and made noise from every side. While they were doing that, Hawan lifted the net slightly on the side facing the cart. Without even thinking, the magic beast fled into the cart. The cart was made of iron bars and a wooden roof. Aside from the wheels attached for transport, it looked like an ordinary animal cage. But the cart had been specially treated for magic beasts. Magic beasts were far stronger than ordinary animals. If they became agitated and started thrashing around, they could often break not only wood, but even iron bars. Because of that, carts and cages meant to hold magic beasts were enchanted. Mana was wrapped around the bars or the entire cart and fixed in place. Once that was done, they were not easy to break. That kind of cart was being used for the cub they had just captured. After entering the cart, the cub lowered its body and growled at everything around it. It bared its teeth and threatened the people nearby, but perhaps because it was frightened, its tail was tucked between its legs. Even though the adventurers were no longer threatening it, the cub kept glaring in every direction as it slowly backed away. It seemed utterly terrified. Panting heavily, it continued to huff and growl. The cub backed all the way into the corner of the cage until its rear touched the iron bars. With nowhere left to retreat, it arched its body like a cat and raised every hair on its body. There was not much fur left on the cub. It had fallen out in patches, almost as if it were suffering from hair loss. Hawan looked at the patterns exposed on the bare skin and let out a faint breath. Earlier, the situation had been too urgent for him to see clearly. But now that he was looking at it up close, the gruesome sight made it hard to breathe. The patterns on the magic beast were not Zent angles. They were completely different from the patterns Ounce or Yunhui drew. "These are blood vessels," Hawan said. Gwen examined the cub's skin and spoke. "It seems so. But they don't look natural." Black veins bulged above the skin as if they had been forced through paths too narrow for them. They looked extremely hard. Rather than blood, it seemed more like fine sand had gathered inside the blood vessels. And over those black veins, which spread out like a spider web, there were traces of blood that had flowed again in a fixed direction. They resembled lash marks. But they had not been inflicted from the outside. Strange as it was, those marks were also traces of blood flow. Gwen frowned as he examined the cub from different angles. "It does seem certain that these are traces left by blood flow, but this is strange. As you said, Hawan, this doesn't look like the natural movement of blood." The black lash-like marks stood out as if they had been emphasized. They did not follow the heart or the original blood vessels at all. Instead, they looked as if they had flowed from front to back, like the stripes of a zebra. Seeing how those specific areas alone were bent, Hawan wondered if the blood had been forcibly moved after it had already hardened. "Are you saying the blood of a corpse that had been dead for quite some time moved? And in a direction completely different from the way blood would normally move through the heart and vessels?" Hawan did not know whether necromancers normally used magic that way or whether this was a special case, so he could not tell what it meant. "I don't know," Gwen said. "I've never even heard of a mage who can move corpses. At least, not among those I know." Hawan looked toward the guild clerk, but the clerk also shook his head. "I have never heard of one either." A bad feeling crept over Hawan's face. A kind of magic no one had ever known, something that should not have existed, had suddenly appeared. And it had happened right after news arrived that a hero had descended in the enemy nation. Could this be the hero's doing? Hawan looked at the cub again. If this was the hero's magic, then the cub's current state might be a failed result. Maybe the whip-like marks weren't supposed to be there. There was a high chance this world's hero was someone from Earth. Hawan had heard several times that the hero had black hair and black eyes. If that was true, then the hero would have had to learn how to use mana just as Hawan had. Naturally, he would have failed many times before he became accustomed to it. When Hawan looked at the cub with that thought in mind, he noticed something he had not seen before. No way! Bits of flesh continued crumbling off. The skin caved in where the net pressed against it. Its face was frightened. Its pitiful cries called for its mother. Hawan let the words slip out like a sigh. "This magic beast, it's still rotting. It does seem that way, but what does that? Gwen stopped speaking. He looked at the cub again, then let out a long sigh. It seemed he had realized what Hwan was trying to say. Is that why the mother was so enraged? Gwen looked at the magic beast with pity. Hwan did not answer. This magic beast was still conscious while its body continued to rot. Its cells and heart were already dead, yet its flesh and organs were decaying as though it were still alive. If so, its nerve cells might be the same. Perhaps this child had been in constant pain and suffering all this time. Maybe the cry calling for its mother had also been a plea that it hurt. If it was crying, "Mom, it hurts," and if the mother felt the same pain and knew her cub's suffering, then it was only natural that the mother would hate humans so much. Hwan called Yunhui in his mind. Yunhui, do you think you can numb this child's pain? If its nerve cells were still functioning, there was a chance Yunhui's poison might work. At the very least, it might be able to stop the pain. A short distance away, Yunhui's horn glowed red. But no pattern appeared on the magic beast's body. Yunhui's horn shone once more, but the result was the same. It seemed impossible. As expected, Yunhui's scent angles only worked on living creatures. Yunhui lowered her head slightly, as though disappointed. Hwan quietly told Yunhui that it was all right, then looked at the cub again. I want to find the mother and the other cubs as quickly as possible. I want to find them and kill them. If complete annihilation was the only way to free them from this pain, he wanted to release them as soon as possible. Gwen nodded. Yes, but who on earth did this? There's no way a magic beast like this could appear naturally. Someone must have made it. There was a hint of fear and anger in Gwen's voice. Did the hero know that what he had created was in this state? If he knew and had left them like this anyway, then he could not have possessed a human heart. Hwan and the adventurers immediately began moving with the cart carrying the cub. Information continued to arrive from the team following the mother's path. The mother's trail was extremely difficult to track, but the killings were impossible to hide. The subjugation party tracking the mother was following the locations where bodies appeared. It was a bleak thing to say. The only fortunate thing was that the mother seemed to have already gotten quite close to the cub. If they found either the mother or the cubs, they might be able to accomplish their goal all at once. Of course, if they caught the cubs first in that situation, the chances of being killed by the mother would probably become much higher. Either way, they had to find them both. When the guild sent the cart, they had also sent a horse. They said it was a horse somewhat used to chaos. Perhaps it had once been ridden by a mercenary or adventurer, or had even served on a battlefield. But when they actually tried to have it pull the magic beast's cart, the horse panicked and started thrashing. It seemed unable to endure the terror of knowing a magic beast was right behind it. In the end, they had no choice but to let someone ride the horse while the adventurers took turns pulling the cart. They could have asked Yunhui, but having one ordinary horse pull Hwan's carriage would be extremely difficult. At first, they had not intended to cover the cart with a cloth, but eventually they did. While the cart was moving, the cub did not cry at all. There were times when it growled uneasily, but most of the time it merely crouched in a corner and watched every direction. If that was the case, there was no need to torment the frightened cub. Their goal was to lure the mother, not to scare the cub. In the end, they decided to cover the cart with a tent cloth while traveling. Once the cloth was placed over it and the inside of the cart grew dark, the cub finally seemed to relax a little. It sat in the corner and made low rumbling cries. Half of it sounded like a threat, and half of it sounded like weeping. After traveling for a little over an hour, Hwan approached the people pulling the cart. The cart pullers were changed every hour or two. The cart was extremely heavy, but because there were many people, changing shifts often actually reduced fatigue and increased their pace. Good work. Oh, it's nothing. You're the one who must be having a harder time than us, Mr. Hwan. 4 people pulled the cart together. 2 pulled from the front. while the other two pushed from behind. But Hwan pulled it alone. Because his strength did not match well with anyone else's, it was easier for him to do it by himself. He did not even need anyone pushing from behind. Since the cart had wheels, it moved if he pulled it. There was no reason for someone to push from the back when it would not really help. Still, to others, that must have looked difficult. Lizzie, who was driving the carriage from behind, often looked at him with concern. Perhaps she was worried about Hwan and the magic beast as well, because her expression looked very complicated and sad. Beside Lizzie, Dorothy raised both hands high and waved them. It seemed she was cheering him on, though for some reason she looked extremely excited. Maybe pulling the magic beast's cart looked fun to her. It was not fun at all. Still, receiving the child's strange encouragement made him feel a little better. It seemed she no longer intended to say she would not come near because she was afraid she would end up resembling her dad. By the time Hwan's turn ended and the next person began pulling the cart, Dorothy had already forgotten the previous incident and was clinging to him again. When the sky began to darken, the subjugation party stopped moving and prepared to camp outside. Campfires were lit here and there, and the cloth covering the cart was removed. Inside the cart, a considerable amount of debris had fallen from the cub. At a glance, it had been hard to tell, but once the pieces were gathered together like this, it became clear that the rate of decay was quite fast. A fair amount of time had passed since the magic beast had first appeared. If it had been rotting at this speed from the beginning, its condition would be far worse than it was now. That meant the speed at which its flesh was decaying was gradually increasing. A short while after the cloth was removed, the cub began to cry mournfully into the air. It seemed to be calling for its mother. Sometimes, its cry grew loud enough to sound like a scream. The laughter of the adventurers, which had always been noisy, fell to less than half its usual volume. The cry of an animal could torment people. Sitting in front of the campfire, Dorothy asked, "Dad, is the one inside the cart really bad?" "Well, did it kill a lot of people?" Dorothy had heard people talking here and there, so she more or less knew why this subjugation party had been formed. But she had never asked about it until now. Hwan had thought she simply was not interested. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to answer, but in the end, he nodded honestly. "Yes. A lot of people died because of that magic beast." "Then it's a bad magic beast?" "Dorothy, just because it's a bad magic beast, does that mean we can't feel sorry for it?" "Why?" Dorothy closed her mouth. She stared quietly at the hem of her clothes, then glanced up at Hwan. "It's locked up because it's a bad magic beast. But when I hear it crying, I feel sorry for it. I want to let it go." "You can't do that." "Right. I can't. If we let it go, other people will die again." Dorothy said nothing more after that. She only glanced at the magic beast from time to time. Something about the child's expression bothered him. He had a feeling she might not have been talking only about the magic beast. While Hwan listened to information from the guild staff and discussed the magic beast with the other adventurers, he occasionally kept an eye on Dorothy. And when everyone else was busy, he saw Dorothy quietly approach Yunhui. Hwan secretly followed her. Dorothy moved close to Yunhui's side and whispered in a small voice, "You might get locked up too. If you get locked in a cart, they won't let you out. Killing people is bad, you know." PFF. It seemed she had remembered the time Yunhui killed the bandits. Hwan smiled faintly. Dorothy looked around to make sure no one was watching, then whispered to Yunhui again. "If the other adults find out, they'll definitely lock you up, so run away. If you run now, nobody will know. You have to go somewhere there aren't any people. Okay? Hurry, go." Dorothy pushed Yunhui with both hands. She seemed frustrated that Yunhui would not run away. Whether Yunhui found Dorothy cute, thought she was foolish, or felt grateful, Hwan could not tell. but Yunhui's tail was wagging wildly. Hawan quietly turned around and left. Inside the cart, the trapped cub let out another long cry. He had a feeling he would not be able to sleep tonight. Chapter 129. It's coming. The second subjugation party was made up of 16 people, 1 magical beast hunter, 5 ordinary hunters, 1 grade 2 adventurer, and the rest grade 3 adventurers. Since another magical beast hunter would have been added after Hawan joined the first team, it was quite a luxurious lineup compared to the other groups. The third team, the one Hawan belonged to, had the largest number of people, but they did not have a magical beast hunter, let alone even an ordinary hunter. Naturally, they had no grade 2 adventurer either. That was why the guild had been so desperate to hold on to Hawan. In hindsight, since Hawan was Santa Claus, the third team might actually have been the most luxurious of all. Hawan himself did not think so, but others might see it differently. The last news they had received from the second subjugation party had come yesterday afternoon. They had reported that they seemed to have almost caught up with the cub. As soon as they received that message, Hawan and Gwen sent back word telling them not to approach any closer and to maintain their distance. The magical beast hunter leading the second team's tracking was young, but capable. Gwen said he did not know him personally, but he had heard about him through others. They had already passed along all the information they knew. The second team knew it was dangerous, so Hawan assumed they would wait to regroup with him before moving again. But when they hurried to the place where the second team was supposed to be, they were not there. There were no sticks or markers left behind for Hawan and Gwen either. What happened? When Hawan looked confused, Gwen asked him to wait a moment, then began walking around the area. Watching him carefully, Hawan noticed that Gwen was only checking trees bent into a shape. Hawan had never formally learned magical beast hunting from anyone. Because he had no teacher, he knew almost nothing about the methods used by other magical beast hunters. All Hawan knew were the hunting techniques Gus had taught him. Gus had taught him carefully, but they were all techniques meant for working alone. Hawan had never learned how to cooperate with other hunters. Is he looking for some kind of magical beast hunter signal? Perhaps magical beast hunters had common signs they used, like distress signals. At last, seeming to have found what he was looking for, Gwen called Hawan over from behind a tree half hidden by the bushes. "Mr. Hawan, please come over here for a moment." Hawan pushed through the undergrowth, and Gwen pointed at scratches so small they were barely visible. On the part of the tree split like a backslash, there were several tiny cross-shaped marks. These marks are used by magical beast hunters. They're simple. 1 means, "I'm in danger, please rescue me." 2 means, "This place or situation is dangerous, so be careful." 3 means, "Someone has taken the initiative away from us." Hawan looked at the marks on the tree again. There were 6 cross marks in total. 2 groups of 3. Someone took control of the hunt from them? Twice. That's right. We can't know the exact details from the marks alone, but judging from the situation, probably. Deep wrinkles formed on Gwen's face. It likely means the initiative over the tracking party, and then the initiative over the hunt itself. The guild guide let out a groan before speaking. Maybe the grade 2 adventurer caused a problem. Apparently, he isn't a bad person, but he has a strong desire to show off and compete. Of course, that's information from another branch. The guide glanced at Hawan and sighed. From the moment he arrived until the moment they departed, he kept asking very detailed questions about how Mr. Hawan went from grade 2 to Santa Claus. He may have felt jealous, or competitive. That's troublesome. Gwen's wrinkles deepened. Magical beast hunters were strong. But they were only strong as hunters. Hunting was not something accomplished through simple strength alone. Hunters used traps and deception, and only after wearing down their prey to a certain degree did they make the kill. If the prey seemed stronger, a hunter avoided confronting it and spent more time weakening it first. That was an iron rule, whether hunting magical beasts or ordinary animals. That was what Hawan had been taught. Hunters were sometimes used to track humans on battlefields, but he had heard that the principle was the same. Even if the target was human, a hunter tracked and caught them in the same way. They did not clash strength against strength. If a magical beast hunter faced a grade 2 adventurer head-on, the adventurer would likely be stronger. Considering the mark said the initiative had been taken away, the hunter may not have been completely pushed aside, but there was a high chance his opinions had not been accepted at all. Hawan folded his arms and spoke. Then they went off to catch the magical beast on their own, without us. Most likely. Gwen examined the ground and the surrounding traces a little more. Since they had ordinary hunters serving as guides, it probably wasn't easy for the magical beast hunter to mislead the trail and slow them down. They must have headed straight for the magical beast. The last message they received had come yesterday evening. Considering the time it took for information to arrive, the grade 2 adventurer may have already taken control by daytime. If that's the case, they're probably in danger by now. Hawan sighed and spoke grimly. The mother is definitely somewhere nearby, so let's make the cub cry a little more and lure her toward us. The cub should smell its mother soon as well. Once it does, it'll probably cry louder. Hawan and Gwen sighed almost at the same time. Just thinking about tormenting the cub made their hearts sink. Humans really were the worst creatures in this world. Truly awful. Gwen and the adventurers pulled the cart holding the young magical beast while surrounding it. From time to time, they banged on metal plates or shouted to scare it. Then they stopped the cart and stood a short distance away, waiting. Frightened by the humans, the cub growled. But once the people moved away, it cried pitifully, calling for its mother. Damn it! This feels terrible. What the hell was that grade 2 bastard thinking? Damn it all! If I were the mother, I'd want to tear every human apart. Every time they heard the cub cry, curses against the grade 2 adventurer burst from people's mouths. There were not many traces of the mother, but tracks from other cubs remained here and there. As they followed that trail, they occasionally found marks left behind by the magical beast hunter. But the distance between the marks gradually grew wider, and by the following afternoon, they stopped appearing altogether. Then, as the sky began to darken, the cub's cries suddenly changed. Until now, it had cried anxiously and pitifully. Now its voice shifted into sharp, frantic shrieks, as if it were screaming. It smelled its mother. Even before Gwen said it, Hawan and all the adventurers in the subjugation party already knew. The cub, which had usually curled up during the day and barely cried, was now pressing itself tightly against the iron bars and crying into the air. Anyone could understand what that meant. The tension among the people reached its peak in an instant. Hawan spread out the detection magic he had been keeping lightly extended around them, pushing it as far as he possibly could. Detecting mana itself was not especially difficult, but continuously maintaining it at maximum range was not easy. It drained his mind more than his mana. Even so, he could not neglect it. For Hawan, who could not track by scent, detection magic was his most important weapon. Hawan approached Yunhui and spoke in a low voice. The harness and carriage can be destroyed as much as needed, so if things get dangerous, forget about these things and focus only on protecting Lizzie and Dorothy. Please. Nay. Yunhui cried softly, as if telling him not to worry, then rubbed her face against Hawan's head like a spoiled child. Hawan lightly patted the fur along Yunhui's neck and smiled faintly. Good. I'm counting on you. Just then, Ounce popped out through the gap between the driver's seat and the carriage. Pi-I! Pi-I! Ounce cried out, hopped over, climbed onto Yunhui's back, and rapidly tapped her with his feet. He seemed a little angry. Perhaps his pride had been hurt because Hawan had not asked him for help. Young Ounce might be entering the troublesome rebellious age people called the Hateful Fours. Hawan did not know the physiology of horned rabbits, so he could not be sure, but that was the feeling he got. Hawan looked at Ounce drumming his feet against Yunhui and smiled. All right, Ounce. I'm counting on you too. Protect Lizzie and Dorothy. Piet. Huff, huff. Ounce breathed hard, as if snorting. Tiny droplets formed at the tip of his damp nose. It seemed he had been quite upset that Hawan had not relied on him. Watching from the driver's seat, Lizzie laughed softly. It was the first time she had laughed since seeing the adventurers deliberately make the cub cry yesterday. Ounce and Yunhui don't seem to care about other magical beasts. It feels like they're only interested in us. Isn't that strange? Lizzie might be right. But that did not mean they did not understand the magical beast's pain or situation. Perhaps they understood everything, but simply placed Hawan and his family first. From Hawan's perspective, that was probably the case. In Yunhui and Ounce's eyes, humans must surely look more monstrous than magical beasts. A bitter smile rose to Hawan's lips. And about 30 minutes later, Hawan learned what had happened to the second subjugation party. A corpse had been abandoned on the narrow road beside the forest. The body was so badly mangled that its original form was almost unrecognizable. The only reason they could tell it was human was because of the familiar shape of the ears, the frame of the torso, and the hair. If even those had not remained, they would not have been able to tell whether it was a person or an animal. The conversations among the adventurers in the subjugation party vanished. In contrast, the cub's cries grew several times louder, shrieking until its throat seemed ready to tear. Its mother's scent must have become even stronger. An hour later, they found another corpse. It was almost the same as the first. The only difference was that its arms and legs had been torn off and scattered here and there. And then again. Fear began to spread little by little among the people. The fourth corpse belonged to the Grade 2 adventurer. His face and body were too ruined to recognize properly, but he had a gilt necklace around his neck. Someone muttered. Doesn't it know that we're chasing it? This mother was completely different from the cub. She was terrifyingly strong. Even the Grade 2 adventurer, who was far stronger than them, had been shredded like a sheet of paper before her. Before that magical beast, every human was weaker than a rabbit. Such whispers passed from person to person. The formula of tracker and beast no longer applied. They were clearly the ones doing the tracking, yet it felt as if the roles of pursuer and pursued had been reversed. Gwen spoke quietly, so the others would not hear. That person may be right. It may not have killed those people and left them behind out of simple rage. It might have guessed that humans would pursue it and is either luring us in or deliberately wearing us down. Gwen continued with a bitter expression. Some magical beasts have exceptionally sharp noses. It may have noticed our scent from far away. Sometimes magical beasts and animals hunt more cunningly than humans. We need to be careful. Hawan nodded. Understood. If Gwen was right, it meant the range of the mother's sense of smell was greater than Hawan's detection range. At first, it was hard to believe, but it was possible. It was easy enough to understand when he thought about how incredible a dog's sense of smell was. Gus had emphasized many times how sharp an animal's nose could be. Maybe even Gwen is getting anxious. A short distance away, Gwen's disciple Jack and several adventurers were looking in their direction. Hawan smiled confidently. You already know I use detection magic. Once it enters a certain range, I'll know right away. We'll have enough time to respond. They spent that night near the forest with unease hanging over them. Keeping detection magic spread out 24 hours a day for several days straight was certainly a burden, but Hawan maintained it as continuously as he could, pushing it to the limit of what he could sustain. Then, around 3 in the morning, Hawan sat before the campfire with his arms folded and briefly closed his eyes. This was the hardest time to fight off sleep. It was only natural for the people standing watch to start nodding off. Even as he slipped into shallow sleep, Hawan consciously kept his magic active. Then he sensed something running toward them from far away. Almost at the same time, Yunhui snorted and pawed at the ground. The cub did not seem to have noticed yet. It had curled up after crying itself exhausted, letting out only faint whimpers. Hawan wet his finger with saliva and checked the wind direction. The wind was blowing from their side toward the other side. The presence he had first sensed faintly was gradually drawing closer. Something with powerful mana was running toward them at high speed. After wearing them down for days, it seemed to have finally decided this was the moment to attack. Hawan quietly rose from his seat. "It's coming." When he spoke in a low voice, the adventurers on night watch and Gwen began shaking people awake. Jack hurried among the sleeping people, waking them not with words, but by kicking their bodies with his feet and arms. Only then did the cub notice. It began to shriek again, crying out in frantic, tearing screams. Chapter 130, The Mother. The place where the subjugation party had set up camp was a short distance away from the forest. Several boulders stood nearby, and stones of all sizes lay scattered across the ground. Campfires made from branches gathered in the forest were spread here and there. On the ground a little way away from the fires lay nets, ready to be thrown at any moment. "The creature will arrive soon. Please get ready." At Hawan's voice, the men hurried into motion. They had been shaken for a moment by the appearance of the monster, but they were all adventurers accustomed to unexpected situations. Once danger was right in front of them, it did not take long for them to regain their composure. The adventurers spread out the nets they had already prepared and took their positions. Some held torches and kept watch in every direction. In the darkness, the torches drifted back and forth like will-o'-the-wisps. Gwen and a few others held bows and arrows. Their arrows had been coated with pine resin. The sound of burning torches mixed with the tense breaths of the people and the sound of them swallowing. While tracking the mother, Hawan had prepared his own method for dealing with it. Of course, he did not know how to kill an undead. No one in this world likely did. The people here did not even seem to know such beings existed, and Hawan himself knew little more than the word necromancer. In movies, zombies seemed to die when their heads were cut off or their brains destroyed, but this monster would probably be different. Hawan glanced at the baby monster. At some point, its appearance had changed drastically. When he first saw it, it had looked like a monster with rotting flesh, but now there was more bone visible than flesh. The softer flesh had rotted away first, followed by the muscles crumbling apart bit by bit. The only parts still relatively intact were the tougher sections of hide. Yet even though it had lost the muscles needed to support its bones, the baby monster's body still moved normally. It still seemed to feel pain as well. Its body simply operated on different principles from those of a living creature. "Who?" Hawan breathed lightly. No matter how abnormal its body was, if everything burned to ash, it would die. Dust would not gather back together and take shape again. Hawan drew the adventurer's attention and spoke in a low voice. "After you throw the nets, get away as quickly as you can. If you make a mistake, people might get caught up in it too." "Understood." "Got it." Responses came from all around him. The nets the adventurers held were coated in oil and pine resin. They were for Hawan's fire magic. Once the nets covered the creature, Hawan planned to use magic and burn it away in a short amount of time. The shorter it lasts, the less time it has to suffer. It would take considerable firepower to turn it to ash, but with Hawan's amount of mana, it should be easy. Hawan looked toward the forest a short distance away. His body tensed slightly. The mother, which had been running through the middle of the forest only moments ago, had already approached the edge in an instant. Hawan gathered mana in his hand and narrowed the range of his mana detection toward the mother. "It's here." The moment Hawan finished speaking, the mother burst out from the entrance of the forest. Gwen and the adventurers, who had been aiming into the trees, shifted their arrows toward the mother. The arrows flew toward it immediately, but by the time they struck the ground, the monster was already running somewhere else. "It's too fast!" someone shouted briefly. Hawan swallowed his breath too. He had already known it was fast from detecting it with mana. But seeing it with his own eyes made him realize just how tremendous that speed truly was. It was difficult for human eyes to keep up with. The darkness also favored the monster more than humans. The baby monster's fur had been a dark yellow, but the mother seemed closer to a deep brown. He could not be certain, but that was how it looked when the torchlight briefly caught it. Its dark-colored fur seemed to absorb its body into the pitch-black air, dulling human vision even further. In the darkness, it looked like a shadow dancing and shifting. Occasionally, part of the black mother's form turned white beneath the torchlight. That was because decomposition had exposed its bones. But a glimpse of bone under torchlight and moonlight was not enough for human eyes or movements to keep up with the mother. Several arrows flew toward it, but they merely cut through empty air and fell to the ground. Following the direction of the monster's movement, the adventurers adjusted the angle and position of their nets little by little. But the monster was too fast. The adventurers' movements became scattered and chaotic. A few continued shooting arrows after the monster. But every shot missed. As if mocking them, the mother dodged the arrows and pounced on the first person at the edge. A scream erupted. The monster caught the adventurer in its jaws, shook him several times, then flung him into the air. The adventurer's body flew through the darkness. The nearby adventurers threw their nets, but it was too late. The monster had already headed somewhere else. Hawan stood in front of the cart holding the baby monster. He forced himself to suppress the urge to run forward without thinking. "It's luring us." Hawan pressed his lips together. The creature was deliberately circling the edges and tearing through the humans. It had probably sensed that Hawan was the strongest one here. "I can't move." Even if Hawan was strong, he was not faster than that monster. Rather than chasing it, it would be 100 times better to wait. The mother's goal was ultimately to rescue its young, so if he guarded the baby, he would eventually come face to face with it. It was a cunning beast. "Yunhui, ounce. Be careful. This thing is fast and strong. On top of that, it's smart. It might even realize that Lizzie and Dorothy are weaknesses. Do not leave Lizzie and Dorothy's side no matter what." Hawan muttered softly in his mind. The carriage carrying Lizzie and Dorothy was far away from the cart. He had deliberately kept it at a distance so that they would not be in danger even if the mother appeared. Perhaps because she heard Hawan's voice, Yunhui's cry came from near the carriage. Then a tremendous sound rang out from that direction. Boom, boom, explosive noises erupted one after another. Wondering what was happening, Hawan turned his gaze slightly and saw Yunhui smashing the rocks near the carriage with her hooves. It seemed she had decided they might get in the way if they needed to escape, so she was clearing them ahead of time. Ounce was on top of the carriage roof. His small body was puffed up as much as possible, as if trying to look threatening. Whether because he was a monster or because he was a rabbit, Ounce's reaction toward the undead mother was quite fast. His twitching ears and nose moved constantly in the firelight. Each time they did, they pointed precisely toward the undead. He was like a living radar. It seemed he did not need to worry about Lizzie and Dorothy. Feeling slightly more at ease, Hawan wrapped mana around his hand. He spread a weak mana detection spell over the nearby area and tracked the mother's movements. It was difficult to confirm with his eyes, but mana detection sensed the creature's position instinctively before his mind could even process it. In a situation like this, it was far more useful than sight. It felt as if he had a radar that moved by instinct. When Hawan refused to move no matter what, the mother seemed to change tactics. It howled long into the air, then charged straight toward the cart. Before it could approach the cart, the adventurers ran forward with their nets spread open and threw them at the monster. But the mother merely lowered its body by a hair's breadth and slipped underneath. Hawan planted his weight in his lower body and stood his ground, holding a torch in one hand. When the mother came right up in front of him, Hawan poured mana into the torch and swung it. A huge flame, fused together with mana, struck the monster's body. The mother took the fire head-on and was sent flying. The instant it landed on the ground, Gwen's and Jack's arrows flew toward it. They must have been waiting for the timing to land a proper shot. The arrows, strengthened by wind mana, struck the mother's body accurately. Hwan's fire surged toward the monster again. A brilliant blaze wrapped around its body and spread into the dark air. It was at that moment something burst out of the forest. It ran swiftly toward them. It was difficult to fight while keeping his mana detection spread wide at the same time. Because he had narrowed the range to deal with the mother, he noticed too late. When Hwan turned, he saw a monster running toward the carriage. It was probably one of the two young. It looked exactly like the one trapped in the cart, but it was slightly larger. This one, too, had almost all its bones exposed. Its decomposition seemed to be progressing faster than the mother's or the baby in the cart. Still engulfed in flames, the mother howled long. As if answering that cry, the larger young snarled viciously and closed in on the carriage. I see. That howl earlier, right before it attacked me, was to call that young one in. Just as Gwen had said, this monster truly was cunning. Hwan was about to move in alarm, but the horn of Ounce, who was on top of the carriage, glowed red. As the small horn sparkled in the darkness, the larger young suddenly toppled forward with all the momentum of its charge and rolled once in front of the carriage. Hwan's eyes widened. If he had not seen wrong, the monster's front leg had just bent in a strange direction. Not long ago, Ounce had only been gathering branches with Dorothy and breaking them. When had he improved enough to attack a running monster? But that seemed to be his limit. Almost at the same time the monster fell, Ounce's horn lost its light. Exhausted, Ounce flattened himself against the roof and panted heavily. The monster sprang back up. The height of its front and rear legs no longer matched. Its front leg really did seem broken. Even so, it appeared ready to attack again. Growling, it faced the carriage. Neighing loudly, Yunhui raised her front legs toward the larger young. Her white legs rose high into the air, then came down mercilessly and stomped the young monster. A miserable scream burst from the monster's mouth. Yunhui trampled it several more times with her front hooves, then quickly turned her body. Then she kicked the monster with all her strength using her hind legs. There was not the slightest hint of mercy. The larger young was bigger than a human, but Yunhui's kick sent it flying helplessly like a small puppy. Seeing that, the mother, now a ball of flame, moved its body. It seemed it was trying to run to its young. Hwan turned and faced the mother. It was time to finish this. It was time to end something that had been a tragedy for both the monsters and the humans. At that moment, the adventurers threw a net over the mother. The net that covered its body flared up as if the flames had leapt onto it. The blaze rose even higher, lighting the night sky. Even in that state, the mother did not die. It walked while letting out a sorrowful cry. The young trapped in the cart and the young beaten down by Yunhui both cried long toward their mother. Pull! Holding the ends of the net, the adventurers pulled hard from both sides. Hwan drew up the mana inside his body and filled both hands with it. Everyone, move back! At Hwan's shout, the adventurers released the net and all retreated at once. Hwan released the mana gathered in both hands all at once. A great wave of mana swallowed the mother. The flames grew several times fiercer, and the mother's body writhed within the fire. The pitiful cries of the beast rose from inside the blaze, then faded away. Its body slowly crumbled and shrank. Its ankles, which had been planted firmly on the ground, flared up and turned to ash. The massive body slowly collapsed like a sandcastle melting into the sea. Hwan approached the larger young, which was staggering toward him while letting out yelping cries. At some point, another team had bound the larger young with a net. It was stronger than a human, but the young was far weaker than the mother. The flames of mana Hwan unleashed turned the young monster to ash in an instant. Watching its mother and sibling die one after another at human hands, the baby trapped in the cart began slamming its body against the bars. Rather than trying to escape, it looked as though it was simply throwing itself against them to die. When Hawan approached, the baby's struggle against the cart grew even more violent. Its eyes, nearly nothing but bare eyeballs now, were filled with hatred. In grim silence, Hawan burned the baby's body completely and killed it. After fully burning the monster's bodies, Hawan stared for a moment at the flames that still lit the night, then turned away. This time, they had been monsters. But the necromancer would also use humans as subjects for magic. If that happened, and if the undead still had consciousness and pain like these creatures did, if the dead, once revived, continued to feel the pain they had carried in life, then what should he do? Could he ignore that, even then, for the sake of only his family? Suddenly, he thought of his mother and father. What if those two were revived and forced into a state like that? The thought was horrifying. Hawan gathered the injured together and healed them with healing magic. Then, while he waited for the flames to die out completely, that thought remained in his mind the entire time.